Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Life is made up of a bunch of small moments that oftentimes cascade and tumble into much larger events and consequences that you never even see coming. For instance, if you're watching this video right now and you choose to stop watching this and maybe go outside, an anvil might drop out of the sky and land on top of your head. Had you chosen to stay inside your room and continue watching this video, Steve, that anvil probably would have never interfered with your life. Now, speaking of small moments today, I want to take a look at 8 moments in Star Wars history that completely changed the course of history for billions, if not trillions, of people. Perhaps one of the most heart-wrenching episode arcs in the Clone Wars series occurred in the beginning of the 6th season, after the clone trooper Tup's inhibitor chip malfunctions and causes him to execute Order 66 prematurely. It's up to fellow clone trooper Fives to figure out what happened to his friend, and he eventually uncovers the entire plot to get rid of the Jedi. And through a 4-story arc, Fives gradually starts piecing together the evidence and clues, and is right about to bring all that evidence to Coruscant, where Chancellor Palpatine was going to be briefed on the situation. But on his way from Kamino to Coruscant, Kaminoan chief medical scientist Nala Se secretly injects Fives with a mind-clouding serum. We're not really sure what this chemical is, but it clearly makes Fives confused and agitated. On top of that, he learns that Palpatine is behind the inhibitor chips, which is another shocking blow for the trooper. Within days, he's learned that the people who created him inserted a chip in his head, and the Chancellor he was supposed to be serving was all a part of this larger conspiracy. If that doesn't make you anxious, well, that drug they injected into him definitely made him extremely paranoid. Not really sure who to trust or talk to, Fives ends up contacting Anakin Skywalker and Rex, and attempts to explain to them what's going on, although he seems erratic and extremely aggressive during their meeting. And ultimately, when the Coruscant Guard arrives, the paranoid Fives pulls out a blaster on them and gets shot and killed as a result. Had Fives not been drugged and more clear-minded, he most likely would have been able to pass on the information to Rex and Anakin Skywalker, which would have prevented Order 66 from ever happening and allowed the Jedi and GAR to arrest Palpatine. We actually do an entire what-if video on this scenario. Kylo Ren is a moody millennial, and like most moody millennials, he's oftentimes judged and misunderstood. In The Last Jedi, we finally figure out why this privileged son of a princess and a general has such trouble adjusting to normal life. One night at Luke Skywalker's Jedi Temple, the Master comes to check on a sleeping Ben Solo. We're not 100% sure what exactly happens next because there are many different versions of the story. But from what we can tell, Luke had sensed something very dark and angry about Ben Solo, and in a moment of fear and desperation, he drew his lightsaber on the sleeping boy. Ben, hardly a teenager at the time, wakes up seeing his master looming over him with his weapon drawn and immediately uses the Force to save himself. It's possible that Snoke had projected dark emotions to Luke at this opportune moment, causing him to draw his sword. We do know that Snoke had been manipulating the boy since before he was even born. But Luke's moment of weakness sends Ben Solo on a creating path of destruction, which leads to the death of many innocent individuals, including his own father. When Mace Windu shows up to Palpatine's office to arrest him, flanked by several Jedi Masters, we see Palpatine for the first time unleash his extremely potent lightsaber skills. In a flurry of energy, the old Sith Lord is able to dispatch 3 Jedi Masters with relative ease. But Mace Windu is probably one of the best swordsmen in the galaxy, and eventually was able to disarm the Dark Lord. But while Mace is slowly draining Palpatine's life energy by reflecting the Sith Lord's Sith lightning back into his own face, Anakin steps in and cuts off Windu's arm, which gave Palpatine an opening to throw the Jedi Master out the window. Now, I'm not sure if Palpatine purposely let Windu win so that Anakin would ultimately come to his rescue, which would turn him to the dark side. It seems like a pretty risky move, but Palpatine was known for pulling off crazy stunts like this. He oftentimes understood people better than they understood themselves. But what if Anakin didn't step in to give Palpatine a hand by cutting off Mace Windu's hand? It's very possible that Palpatine would have died and the Clone Wars would have come to an end shortly after. And then the Jedi would have been able to retain their position in the galaxy, and perhaps more importantly, the Sith line would completely end. A lot of things had to go right with the Battle of Yavin for the Rebels. First, they only had a handful of snub fighters and no real heavy firepower. Second, they had a limited time to destroy the Death Star because it was slowly coming into range of Yavin 4 and the Rebel High Command. Third, the one weakness that the Death Star had was a tiny exhaust chute that required a proton torpedo to enter it and then immediately make a 90-degree turn, which to this day still seems physically impossible to me. Gold Squadron had been destroyed attempting to pull this maneuver off, and so did Red 1. This was because the approach to the exhaust chute was located at the end of a long trench, and once a starfighter entered this trench, they made incredibly easy targets. But when Luke entered the trench, he was somehow able to survive longer than most. But with Darth Vader close behind him, it seemed like even the Jedi prodigy wouldn't have long to live. Luckily, Han Solo comes out of nowhere and manages to give Luke some cover, but he doesn't actually physically hit Vader, who was about to close in for the kill. Instead, he hits Vader's wingman, who inadvertently collides with Vader, setting the Dark Lord into an out-of-control spin. The thing is, had Han Solo hit Vader, most likely his TIE Advanced Experimental Fighter shields would have absorbed the hit, giving Vader still enough time to take Luke out, which would have basically prevented him from destroying the Death Star. Without the destruction of the Death Star, the Rebel Alliance would have had serious recruitment problems, especially after losing their entire high command, and most likely the movement would have faded away. Now, a lot of things had to happen right in the Battle of Yavin for the Rebels to succeed, but a lot of things also had to perfectly align for the mission to Scarif to succeed as well. Even when the Rebels were able to steal the plans of the Death Star, the planetary shield was still blocking all transmissions off-world, and a series of equipment and switches needed to be activated in order for that transmission to be successful. Ultimately, the duty falls onto a small group of rebels pinned down by Imperial Special Forces at the base of the comm tower. The incoming fire was incredibly hot, and any attempt to leave cover usually resulted in a painful death, which is when Chirrut Imwe, the Blind Guardian, steps up to the plate. He's not Force sensitive, but he believes in the Force, and to this day I still have no idea how he made it across all that open space without getting hit even once. Maybe the sight of a blind man walking nonchalantly across the battlefield threw off the Imperial forces. Maybe he was walking so slow that the Imperials were leading him too much with their blasters. Maybe even Imperials don't shoot blind people. Or maybe the Force was actually with him. Because Chirrut Imwe was successful at hitting the Master Switch, the Rebels were able to receive the Death Star plans, which gave the organization a small slither of hope that kept them going. R2-D2 was a badass. It's hard to tell because he's essentially a small moving trash can, but he had the courage and fire inside of him that made him a hero on par with the rest of the Rebels. When Princess Leia gave R2-D2 the Death Star map, he single-mindedly continued on his mission, no matter what the consequences were. And when Luke and his uncle brought the little droid from the Jawa junk traders, R2-D2 wasted no time and immediately escaped, which prompted Luke Skywalker to leave his home and find him. Luke would get jumped by a few Tusken Raiders, but it would also lead him to meet up with old Ben Kenobi, the Jedi who was supposed to receive the message from Leia in the first place. More importantly, Luke also avoided the house call made by the Imperial stormtroopers, which ended up leaving his uncle and aunt deep fried. By seizing the initiative, R2-D2 not only managed to deliver the Death Star plans to the rebellion, he also saved Luke and helped him start his journey to becoming a Jedi. Now, there are two schools of thought about Jar Jar. Either everything he did was planned and he was some evil mastermind, or maybe he was just a bumbling idiot the whole entire time. I like indulging in this first theory because it's fun, but in reality, the second theory about his life is a lot more realistic. Now, Jar Jar was a character that almost didn't even survive the Phantom Menace. In the beginning of the movie, while Qui-Gon Jinn is being chased by a Separatist troop carrier, he runs directly into Jar Binks. Instead of trying to go around him like a normal person would, Qui-Gon is almost magnetically drawn to Jar Jar and ends up tackling the Gungan like he's some Albanian human trafficker, saving his unworthy life. Jar Jar actually ends up having a much larger impact on the galaxy than he really deserves to make. When Padme Amidala takes leave after an attempt on her life, Jar Jar takes over as lead representative for Naboo and is manipulated into proposing the Emergency Powers Act, which essentially gave Palpatine the ability to do whatever he wanted. It was the first step to dismantling the Republic's democratic checks and balances. I never understood why Qui-Gon Jinn thought it was a good idea to bring a child into the middle of an active war zone. I never really understood a lot of the things that Qui-Gon Jinn did, which is also why I'm reading Master and Apprentice right now, and I'm finding out that Qui-Gon Jinn was actually a very terrible master in a lot of ways. And I'm pretty sure by bringing Anakin to a war zone at such a young age, it probably helps speed up the young boy's path to the dark side. But of course, Anakin would play a crucial role in the Battle of Naboo. After being told to hide by Qui-Gon Jinn, Anakin finds himself in the cockpit of a Naboo starfighter, and after pushing a series of buttons, he ends up taking off and eventually crash lands inside the droid control ship, controlling the entire Separatist army and destroying it, which honestly has to be one of the luckiest sequences of events I've ever seen. But without this event happening, the defense of Naboo would have definitely failed, and things would have gone very poorly for Naboo and Queen Amidala. It's also very likely this event gave Anakin some serious PTSD, which the Jedi Order misdiagnosed several times as just being emotional. So there you have it, guys, 8 small events that had a huge impact on the rest of the galaxy. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, if you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.